Chip shortage is still a problem for the auto industry. Do you think such demand and supply gap will become wider as more investments flow into the EV market?
Well, it stands to reason that that will be the case. The EV is basically a computer on wheels. And so as more and more of the mix becomes EV, there'll be more and more demand for chips. That doesn't do anything to the supply necessarily, but the demand is going to be up. So I think overall, because we already have a capacity shortfall in chip fabrication industry, there'll be more competition for that capacity. Though, of course, the chip industry has long-term plans to increase its capacity. Governments are giving them all kinds of incentives to do that. But I'm sure, as you know, they cost billions of dollars. So the huge capital investment, long delays. That's the reality. And the auto industry has had lower priority as a customer than other users of chips, which is part of the problem. The margin for selling a chip to a computer maker is probably higher than selling it to an automaker. So a lot of these things have come together almost like a perfect storm. And this has created a problem for the auto industry in particular.
What kind of fundamental changes will happen in automotive supply chain to accommodate EV market needs?
Supply chains are being restructured quite a bit these days. The move for a completely globalized supply chain, I think, has been challenged in recent years because of the pandemic and other factors, tariffs and so on. And a lot of companies, not just in the auto industry, but in general, are moving towards what they will call a regional strategy for supply chains as opposed to a globalized strategy. So that means building capacity for different markets, having them be not completely independent, but somewhat independent, not being dependent upon a single source from a distant supplier if you can avoid that. So there's a lot of pressures leading to the restructuring of supply chains to make them look more regional. And I think we'll see that in the auto industry as well. So I think that's number one, that the restructuring of the design of where the capacity is, where we're building these things, where we're manufacturing the products. Back in 2011, when we had the earthquake in Japan, a lot of supply chains were disrupted, particularly in the auto industry. And they discovered that one of the main reasons was that their lower tier suppliers were affected. There was a chip manufacturer by the name of Renesas that lost their factory, and every auto manufacturer in the world was disrupted. The production had to be cut back because this one factory was a major supplier for the world. Most of the auto companies were not aware that this was a supplier to their supplier, maybe even a lower tier. So they didn't even know that they were at risk. And, they faced the consequences. And as a result, I think the lesson has been learned that there now has to be a lot more visibility in the end-to-end supply chain, not just your immediate customers, but or suppliers, but who are the suppliers to your suppliers and the relationship with your customers. So we're seeing a lot of fundamental changes in the relationship between the players in the supply chain, and looking to have more visibility to lower tiers, looking to share the risk. There are certain strategies that are being adopted. One we've seen is where customers, if they're a high value, complex product like an automobile, and their suppliers may be big companies, but they're producing more fundamental products, like steel and nuts and bolts, the customer is now starting to take over some of the management of their supply chain. We've talked in the past about vendor managed inventory, and now we're starting to see what we call customer managed inventory. So customers are going to take more of a direct role in managing the production and distribution of the parts and materials that they're procuring from the suppliers, perhaps even taking over the decisions. Short of acquiring them, a vertical integration, they're still separate companies, but we see a transfer of control to the customer.